So this brings me to the last of these topics, and you may have guessed, just based on the immense media coverage, that I'm going to talk more about this Kavanaugh confirmation situation and this whole affair and issue with these sexual assault accusations. So just really briefly, I want to just cover some of the facts that have developed since the last time I did a video on this, and I'll start from early in the week and move on temporally. So we had two new accusations come out against Brett Kavanaugh. The first originally was Dr. Ford, who claimed that he touched her, well, not just touched her, he held her down and tried to take her clothes off and rape her during a house party 36 years ago when he was in high school, and he was 17. But two other people have come forward. One is this woman named Deborah Ramirez, who appeared in an article written by Ronan Farrow in the New Yorker, who claimed that she was at another party in college at Yale with Kavanaugh, and that she was drunk and at this party, and he basically exposed his penis to her during this party. She felt really violated about this. She claims that she heard his name, his full name mentioned, and she said that he was standing over her and was pulling his pants up so that it was his penis in her face. Nobody at that party can corroborate that story. In fact, most of the people she's named, everyone she's named, either claims it didn't happen and they can't remember it. So, and of course, Kavanaugh denies that. The other is from someone named Julie Swetnick, who basically came out saying, and she's been, her lawyer is this guy, Michael Avenatti, who's the attorney for Stormy Daniels in her suit against Donald Trump. And essentially what she claims is that Kavanaugh and his friend Mark Judge of the Ford accusation fame engaged in prepping women for being gang raped when they were in college at Yale. So that sounds like a pretty fantastic story. Again, no evidence, no corroborating witnesses, just her word, and the denial, of course, from Kavanaugh. So what happened? Well, on Thursday they had hearings for this. They had Dr. Ford and Kavanaugh testified to the Senate about their experiences and their recollections of what happened. So I'll just quickly summarize what I took away from that. So Ford's testimony was very quiet. She was kind of mousy. She looked very uncomfortable. She said she was terrified to be there, but she felt like it was her civic duty to be there. So she was kind of giving her facts the way she saw them. Kavanaugh, on the other hand, was very emotional. He was very angry. He came across very in a fighting frenzy. He basically claimed that the Senate was out to search and destroy him. That's the words he used. He said that they're not looking for advice and consent. They're looking for search and destroy. He said the whole thing was political. It was a politically motivated attack on his character due to people being unhappy with the election, with Trump, and that it was ultimately revenge for the Clintons, is what he said. He called the whole thing a circus and said it was a national disgrace. Other big moments from that I remember that I thought were pretty pivotal. Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator, basically got really hot and heated, said that this whole thing was a sham, that it was the most unethical thing he's ever seen, and that if anyone votes against Kavanaugh on the basis of this, then they're legitimizing something that shouldn't be legitimized, this horrible attack on an individual in an attempt to smear him and delay a confirmation of a Republican justice. So I thought that was pretty powerful. Friday, after the testimony, they were going to call a vote on Kavanaugh. The Democrats left the room when this was supposed to happen. It was all very dramatic. They couldn't countenance this. They were in search of their smelling salts and their fainting sofas. Meanwhile, there was a lot of hullabaloo about this guy, Jeff Flake, senator from Arizona, who in the morning said he was going to vote in favor of Kavanaugh, and then changed his tune in the afternoon, saying that he wanted the FBI to investigate all these events. And he claimed that he just wanted it to last a week. He said a week would be enough. There were a few other people, Collins and Murkowski, two other Republican senators, came out in support of this as well. And so the vote was delayed. There will be another investigation into this Kavanaugh affair with Ford. The FBI will do it. It will be the 7th investigation conducted by the FBI on Kavanaugh. And one thing that was kind of suspicious about this was Flake. He flaked. He lived up to his name. But in the morning, he basically was for voting for Kavanaugh, and then during the day, he was basically confronted by a couple of women in an elevator, leftist activists, who claimed they were survivors and that they were basically really on him to explain why he was supporting Kavanaugh. He looked very uncomfortable. He looked, I was seeing people on Twitter saying that the pose that he had with the senators, he looked so, like, ashamed of what he was doing, like, very torn. They said that would be a great Baroque painting, which I thought was kind of a funny remark. But, that's where we stand. We're waiting for the investigation to come now. The FBI is going to be checking out the details of the story. Now, around the story, what did we see? We saw tribalism, intense tribalism and anger on both sides. We saw women and men, their supporters, carrying "Men are trash" signs and T-shirts around the Capitol. We saw equal numbers or comparable numbers saying that they stand with Brad and that they need to confirm Kavanaugh now. There was a lot of partisan energy behind this. A lot of people were swarming the Capitol, protesting all about it, making it into a gender issue, making it into an attack on white men and so on. The usual tripe that we hear from the left. And the usual suspects came out to sort of give their take on the testimony. So you had people like Chuck Schumer, Mazie Hirono, and Chris Coons saying, on the one hand, this is not a criminal trial, they said, and so the presumption of innocence doesn't hold. That only holds in criminal trials. This is a fact-finding case, and so we don't presume his innocence. Well, let's talk about that for a second. Of course it holds. Of course the presumption of innocence holds. It holds outside of criminal court cases, not because, for the very reason that it holds in criminal cases. The fact is that innocence until proven guilty is, like I had said in my earlier video, an application of another principle to law. Law is a field, a science on its own, and we are applying a wider principle, the principle of the onus of proof belonging to he who asserts the positive. In any assertion, any claim, it is incumbent on the person making the positive claim to provide evidence for the claim. Otherwise, if you allow in people to say whatever they want and put the burden of proof on people to refute that, you allow in all sorts of arbitrary and irrelevant things that are impossible to disprove. And I gave the example of the panda at the center of the universe last week. There's other or the center of the earth last week. There are other examples. I mean, if I accuse you of stealing my TV, and the TV is not in my apartment, and the authorities come and now I tell you have to disprove that, there's no end to what I can say. You can say, well, I have an alibi, I wasn't around. I can say, well, you hired somebody to do it. You hired someone to come to my apartment and steal the TV. And then you say, well, I don't have any record of me taking the money out. And I said, oh, you laundered it through a Swiss bank account under a different name. And we have to look for that. I mean, there's no end to the irrationality if you allow in these things. So this idea that because it's not a criminal trial, you can just throw out arbitrary things and that there's no burden of proof on he who asserts the positive, that is epistemologically unjustified and it's total nonsense. So as far as that goes. Now, two other comments. So that was one comment we heard. Another comment we heard was, well, he was angry. Look at him during that testimony. He was so defensive and upset. Doesn't that prove that, he doesn't have the right temperament to be a judge? Doesn't it prove that he could be a rapist? I mean, look at him. Some people were even saying that, look, he's so angry. Now, one person, I think it was some CNN analyst, I didn't see, it was on Twitter, I can't remember the name, said, well, now we know what Kavanaugh looks and sounds like when a woman tells him no. On what? On the basis of him getting angry during a testimony? Because they've insinuated all these things about his character. They've attacked him relentlessly. They've attacked his family. He's now called upon to sit in the national spotlight and defend himself against all these horrible charges. Wouldn't you be kind of testy? Wouldn't you be kind of angry? Wouldn't you be righteously angry? So I think this idea that his temperament is all wrong. I mean, it's also an example of moving the goalposts. This is a common fallacy in logic. When someone says, well, we need to prove X, and let's say you fail to prove X, they move the goalposts. They change the standard. They say, well, let's instead try Y. So they've moved the goalposts from saying we need to prove that he did it to now, maybe he did it, maybe he didn't, but look at his temperament. I mean, isn't that reason enough to throw him out of the confirmation process? I mean, this is a classic case of moving the goalposts, and it shows a lot of dishonesty on the part of the people who are putting forward these accusations and supporting Ford in her testimony. So, what are my thoughts on this? Where do I land now after seeing testimony? Well, for one thing, some organizations like the ACLU have come out saying that she was credible. I mean, I'm even seeing analysts, people I respect online, coming out and saying, well, watching the testimony, she seemed like a credible witness and he seemed credible, so I don't know who to believe. Well, that's true. But on what basis do you say that somebody is or isn't credible? Is it on the basis of a televised testimonial in front of a whole bunch of people on TV? I mean, we don't know anything about this woman. We don't know her mental stability. We don't know if she's a consummate actor. We don't know if she really believes this stuff, or maybe she had some other trauma in her life that she's conflating with this. We have no basis for any of it. That's the problem with this whole thing, this whole circus, is that it's not objective. There's no evidence, there's no corroborating witnesses. And one of the reasons for that is because it's so far in the past, all possible evidence that you could use is basically gone. It's been removed by time. So the fact that we're now trying to play this he says, she says game and figure out who's more believable on a witness stand, that is completely unobjective, non-objective, and I don't think anyone has any basis for saying that either one of them is credible based on what they're saying, because think about what credible means. Credible means, is what they're saying consonant with the facts? Can I believe what they're saying? Well, how do you prove what they're saying is true or false? And even if it turns out that, say, something he said during the testimony wasn't true, or something she said in the testimony is not true, well, they're lying or bending the truth in that instance, but does that mean the event didn't happen? Does that mean that they're always lying or always telling the truth? I mean, there's really no objective way to validate this, just on the basis of the he said, she said accusation and a little media circus that goes with it. So I'm pretty loath to say that I believe really either one. Now, I will say it's very possible, and I think the simplest explanation, really, is that something did happen to her, but it's not clear to me whether it was this time around, like during this party, or maybe there was another more serious assault that's like, fragmenting her memories. This is a common occurrence with post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, a lot of people say that you never fail to remember your attacker, but that's not true. Studies have shown that when you get attacked and you're traumatized, you can, your memory is not better in those instances. In fact, the trauma can actually hurt your memory. So I don't really know if he did it or if it did happen, but if it did happen, I think there's some reasonable reason to believe it did happen. Something happened just on the basis of her actions. We don't know when it happened or who did it, or, if it has anything to do with Kavanaugh. So it's not really objective. Now, this whole thing about the FBI needing to investigate, and it kind of goes along with what I just said. What do they expect to uncover? What do they expect to find? I mean, are they going to interview Mark Judge? Are they going to interview some of the other people that are claimed to have been there? Well, they could do that, but then those people have within their rights to plead the fifth, or to say nothing, or to say they don't recall. In fact, saying I don't recall is the safest thing, because it's not saying that it didn't happen. It's just saying I don't remember it if it did. And so it kind of covers all the bases. So if the witnesses decide to do that, then what are they going to do next? I mean, they could go to, there was like Kavanaugh's calendar. I mean, sure, if they can date the ink or whatever on that, I don't even know how you ascertain that that's a legitimate calendar. How do you know that all the things he had on his calendar occurred and that he went to all of them? And it just, the whole thing reeks to me of just non-objectivity. It's all subjective. It's all speculation. And I think for that reason, that's why it's turned into a circus. It's because there's no real interest here in the truth, one way or the other. It's basically one tribe fighting against another tribe. And it's not clear to me who's the most contemptible in this story. I still think Dianne Feinstein's pretty contemptible for holding the evidence and waiting till the 11th hour. But I mean, I'm loath to believe that this is something that we can ever get to the bottom of, just on the basis of the facts. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, that we have a statute of limitations, right? We have a statute of limitations because eventually it gets to the point where you don't have evidence one or the other. It's been too long, and so your case kind of dries up. The last thing I'll say about this is, so I mentioned that I don't think that, it's going to really achieve anything. I don't think the FBI is going to find anything further. And I think a lot of the arguments that the Democrats and other people who have come out in the media have said about him and his testimony, what it says about his character, I don't really agree with any of that. I still think a lot of this is very arbitrary. And I think that it ultimately boils down to a political calculation by them. But I want to put out one more thought here, and this is something I didn't say in my other video, but it's something that I kind of thought from the beginning, but I wasn't fully sure of it, but I thought about it a little more, and I'm pretty sure of this now. So let's suppose that by some method we could find out that this happens. Suppose Mark Judge comes forward, they penetrate his defenses, and they get him to admit that he was there and that he remembers it was Kavanaugh. And now, Kavanaugh is sort of caught in this contradiction. Well, what does that say? You have a 17-year-old guy who's drunk, who doesn't have great memory of what happened. I mean, he might be telling the truth. He doesn't actually remember doing it. Maybe he had a lot of bad habits. He was not a great person back when he was a teenager. But what does that say about him now? What does it say about him as an adult? I mean, this pattern of abuse and alcoholism and all the other things they're accusing him of, there's no evidence of that having followed after his high school years. There's no evidence of it among his coworkers or anyone else he's interacted with. All the women that he's interacted with since then have said only good things about him. In fact, glowing things about him. And does this say much about his ability to be a fair judge and arbitrate? I don't think so. I don't think you have to be perfectly moral to be a judge. I think that the standard here of going back to someone's yearbook and saying, what did they write? Did you boast about the size of your genitals? Did you talk about how you want to, bang somebody in the class? What does that say about your ability now to be a judge? I mean, did we do this to Ginsburg? Did we do it to Sotomayor? Did we do it to Kagan? Did we do it to any other justice? Did we do this to John Jay when he was running for the Supreme Court, back in Washington's term? I mean, this is kind of crazy. I mean, where do you draw the line? If a 6th grade boy throws rocks, or maybe 5th grade, I don't know. I was pretty good as a 6th grader, but I'm sure there are people who are nasty to women and girls, in the schoolyard. If somebody is playing tag and throws a rock at a girl and breaks her glasses in 6th grade, does that show now he's a woman hater, a misogynist, and he can't be a fair judge? How about 8th grade? How about 9th grade? I mean, where do you draw the line? I mean, yes, the guy was 17. It was clearly closer to adulthood than a 6th grader, but 17 is still actually a minor. It's still a child. He's not fully rational. He's not fully an adult. His character hasn't been fully formed. I mean, I made mistakes when I was a 17-year-old. I didn't assault anybody, but I also wasn't totally angelic, and most people aren't. They make mistakes all the time. So I don't know that this is something that we should take as a reason not to confirm him if he's a good judge and if he's got a good record and people agree with pointing him on the basis of his work as a judge. Quad judge, I don't think this has anything to do with it. I think, I leave that as a question to you as the viewer to think about and ponder. I'm not fully sure that that's valid, and I'm open to hearing the other side on that view. But that's my view right now, is I don't think that even if this were substantiated, that it necessarily means he'd be a bad judge. So there's that. So that about covers it. I tried to be as quick as I could this video. It's still pretty long, but more than happy to hear comments, questions, concerns. My email is going to be listed in the description here. You can also follow me on Twitter. You can check out my blog where I post all my videos. And leave comments in the video if you think that anything I said was wrong, or if you're interested in hearing more about something and want me to clarify. More than happy for all that. Anyway, have a great week. It was nice talking to you again, and I'll see you soon. Bye.